We're going to give a couple of minutes for everyone to get in, get settled, have a seat, and we'll get ready to get started. It's good to see you all. I think we have the waiting room all taken care of now. This is awesome. So again, I am welcoming you all here. My name is Brenda. I'm a coach trainer here at Coach Transformation Academy. I am here to introduce this wonderful coach, Melissa Boggs, who has come to share with us this evening. So let me tell you just a little bit about Melissa, and then I'm going to turn it over to her because she's got a lot of great information to share with you. Melissa is a cultural agility and leadership coach with over 10 years of investment in agile movement. She's a certified enterprise coach with an MBA in IT management. She blends education, experience, and enthusiasm to work closely with leaders on their most challenging business problems. Through training and coaching, Melissa encourages executive leadership to expose and understand the hidden strengths and weaknesses that exist within their culture and how they can amplify what is best about their traditions, habits, and behaviors in their organization. Now, most of all, she helps leaders and employees alike to introduce joy and inspiration in the workplace. Now, another thing I learned about Melissa, I'm going to share with you real quickly, is her secret weapon is gratitude, and her favorite quote is, just do the next thing right. So Melissa, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for the lovely introduction, Brenda. First, I just want to thank everyone who's joining today, not just for being here today, but for the work that you do. One thing you'll hear throughout this talk is my empathy for your role in success of businesses, success of leaders. It's not an easy job to be a coach. And what I also learned in the last few years is it's also not an easy job to be a leader. And so a lot of this talk has to do with having been on both sides of that coin and the things that I learned from that and the things that are changing how I coach now as a result. I do want to warn you, this is not a sit back and relax kind of talk. So I'm going to be engaging you and asking you to think about some things in your world and with your clients. So you will need paper and pen or Sharpies and Post-its, whatever you use to take notes or write things down. So if you don't have that, you might want to grab it here in the next few seconds. So I'm happy to take you through my journey from coach to CEO and back. So the first thing I want to do is think back to your most challenging client, for whatever that might mean to you. Might mean that they were resistant to change, or they were in a difficult situation, which made it challenging for you as well. But think back to the most challenging client that you have had, and I would love for you to write that down on a Post-it note or on a piece of paper. I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about that and write that. Now I'll tell you a secret. About 2 years ago, I was that client. So I'm going to paint a picture for you. I was the CEO of a small company that had a large audience. Scrum Alliance is a nonprofit membership association with over 1 million members globally. And I was the co-CEO. And one of the things that was really interesting about Scrum Alliance when I arrived is that they really had a need at that point to undergo their own transformation. They were not necessarily following all of the principles that they put out into the world, but they wanted to. And so part of the reason that I was hired into the co-CEO role was to actually take this organization, not just through a transformation, but through a transformation to really live their values. But as you can imagine, that's not easy. And there was a particular day that I will never forget. And it was actually right around 2 years ago. It was April or May of 2019. So I want you to picture, I'm sitting in my office and I literally, like this woman on the slide, had my head in my hands. We were in the middle of a 3-day workshop in which my entire company was selecting what teams they were going to be on. We completely restructured and reorganized the company and gave employees an opportunity to self-select into what team they felt the most passionate about. And I was really excited about this beforehand because I thought people would really jump on it. You know, they would like, oh, what a cool company. They let us choose our work. And while there was some of that, there was also a lot of fear. What if I choose the wrong team? What if this team doesn't get as much recognition as a different team? Like there's this fear that I just didn't count on from my leadership role. And so there was a lot of chaos and there was a lot of just freaking out, frankly, in the organization during that 3-day workshop. And so I'm sitting in my office with 3 of the best coaches in my industry. And I'm not being hyperbolic. These are 3 of the best coaches in the Agile coaching industry that were there to help me kind of move us through this workshop. And I've got my head in my hands and I'm not crying, but I'm just like, I'm frustrated, I'm worried, but the weight of the world felt like it was on my shoulders. And these 3 coaches who were incredible were saying things like, well, just do this, or just do that, or you've got this, it's fine, you're just going to do this. And I sat there not speaking for quite a while. And then I looked up at them and I said, listen, I know you mean well, all 3 of you, but this is a lot harder for me than it is for you. Because I had been in their shoes. I had been the coach on the other side of the leader who said, oh my gosh, like I see such a clear path. I know you're going to be okay. I know this is going to be fine. But I wasn't in their shoes until that moment. And it was really a moment of reckoning for me, which was kind of strange considering I was in the middle of all this other stuff. But I really did have this reckoning where I was like, oh my goodness. Like I thought I had empathy, thought I was being kind, but I didn't realize until that moment, like if I was sitting there saying things like, well, you just do this, you just do that, even if it was just in my own head, you know, because as a trained coach, I don't tell someone what their solution is, but even in my own head, I would be judgmental, or I'd be like, oh, I see the path. Why don't you see the path? Not understanding the depth of responsibility and complexity that was in that leadership role, that was in that person's world that I was just sitting across the table from. And so again, back to that moment, you know, I told them, this is so much harder for me than it is for you. And to their credit, they all immediately recognized and they were like, you're right. Okay, how can we support you? And everything turned out great. Frankly, it was an amazing workshop. The transformation was amazing. I mean, it was great, but I will never forget that moment of reckoning for myself. And so it's part of why I'm here today, is I want to make sure that we're having a discussion about empathy for both sides and what it is like to be in their shoes, and some recognition of what it's like to be in our shoes as a coach. So I already touched on this a little bit, but I just want to explain a little bit of my background. So I have spent the last actually 12 years now as first a Scrum Master and then an Agile Coach in the space of business agility. And so we have an interesting role in Agile coaching because while we have professional coaching angles, we also do have a goal, unlike your typical executive or professional coach. And the goal is to help the business be more agile and have more agility. And so I've been doing this work for a long time. And then as I mentioned, I was tapped by Scrum Alliance to become their co-CEO. And what's interesting about this is that Scrum Alliance certified me. So my entire career, I grew up, as I always say, in the Scrum Alliance community. So I worked up through their certifications to becoming a certified enterprise coach through Scrum Alliance, which is their highest coach certification. And so coming into this, I was both obviously excited and flattered and, felt appreciative to be tapped for it. But also like I had a passion because this was a near and dear organization to my heart. So I expected it to be difficult. I expected it to be exciting. I didn't expect to have my coaching philosophy challenged, but that's exactly what happened. So if you are a coach or if you are engaged with one, it's likely because something needs to change, right? No one engages a coach because they want to stay exactly the same and they're not going to do anything different. So thinking to your current client, on a Post-it note or on a piece of paper, write down what it is that needs to change in 5 words or less. I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about that and write that down. What needs to change in 5 words or less? Okay, you can continue writing if you need to, but we're going to keep going. Also, if you're a coach or engaged with one, it's because you recognize that catalyzing that kind of change that you just wrote down requires support. The coach is one type of support, but I imagine that there are other people required to support that change. So when you look at the change that you just wrote down, whose support do you need? It may even be just that one person, the client that hired you, but it might be more than that. So whose support is required to support that change? I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. So you may have written down the leader that you're working with. And I want to bring attention here to something that we probably don't want to admit happens. Again, that moment of reckoning for me made me realize that like the way that those coaches, however well intended, were speaking to me, I had spoken that way too, or at least thought it. Maybe I didn't say it out loud, but things like, why aren't they listening? They're doing it all wrong. We don't want to admit that we do that, right? Coaches are humble and we're evolved, but we all do it in some form or another. On the other side, something is going on inside the leader's mind too. And we also hear things like, well, I'm not sure what value the coach is providing. Nothing's changed since they've been here. And these coaches are really expensive. Are they really helping? And so I want to recognize a thing that, again, I don't think we want to admit to often, probably on either side of this, is there is this blame game that can happen if we're not careful. But the fact is, we need each other. And you might have written down the leader that you're working with. In Agile transformation especially, but I know this is the case in really any sort of change. It's really evident to everyone that if leadership is not on board, then it is really difficult to make change in the organization, because you can work with teams, you can work with individuals, but if the behaviors that are reinforced or rewarded by leadership are something completely opposite of what you're trying to accomplish, then you're not going to get very far. You're going to hit a wall over and over. So the fact is, in order to create change, often they need a coach, but always the coach needs the leader. So for that reason, recognizing the blame game that can happen even when we don't intend for it to, and recognizing that we do need each other. I'm going to walk you through the next several slides where I'm going to invite you to step into the shoes of your client. I'm going to tell you a few things that I actually thought when I was a CEO. And I wish that my coaches would have known. In some cases, I was able to tell them. In some cases, it was like hard to say or hard to say out loud. So I'm going to walk you through these. And as I do, I want you to, or before I do, I want you to write down the name of your current client or your most recent client, if they're not the one that you already wrote down a few minutes ago. But as we're walking through these, I want you to be thinking about them, a very specific client, your current or your most recent client. So write down their name. For this one, for whatever space that you have, write it really big and write it as nicely as you can, because that is going to represent that person for you for the next several slides. I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. Awesome. All right, before I move on, I just want to mention, I can see that there are a bunch of comments in the chat, but I'll just say I can't see them right now while I'm sharing my screen. So I promise I will get to your questions at the end. I will definitely leave some time at the end for comments and questions and for us to chat a bit. So feel free to put them in there, just know that I can't see them yet. All right, so I have a few letters for you. Dearest coach, as a leader, here are the 3 things I wish you knew. Sincerely, your client, and you can imagine what you just wrote down at the end of this letter. Every decision is laden with nuance and complexity. So this seems like a given, but I can honestly tell you I did not recognize the heaviness of this until I was in those shoes. When you are a leader, especially at, you know, the senior leadership level, there are a million things that you are trying to juggle with every decision. And there are some decisions that from the outside, I might have thought they were really, really simple. And from the inside, they're not. You are constantly trying to juggle the opinions and fears and just personalities of every employee in the organization. There was never a single time in my tenure in that role that everyone had the same opinion about something. Even something that seemed simple or something that seemed very straightforward to me, there were always a plethora of opinions. And that's just inside the organization. So that doesn't consider, you know, in my case, the board of directors or the members of my community who also all had very different opinions. And so every decision is laden with nuance and with complexity. So when you're looking at your note about the change you seek and the client that you just referenced, consider what it is that they might be dealing with and the complexities that might be at play. Because often it's not the decision itself, it's also how am I going to roll this out? How am I going to make sure that I heard all the voices that I needed to hear before I made the decision? How am I going to make sure that for those who are, you know, not pleased with the decision, that they understand that they were heard? I mean, there are so many things that is going through that leader's mind, and that's just the people side. That doesn't even include thinking about things like the financial impact or the impact to the future of the company. So depending on what the decision is, if you think there's 3 layers, there's probably 10. And there's the connection of all of those layers together. You know, one layer might be straightforward, but when you combine it with a different one, now you have a different complexity. So I want you to look at your note and for a couple of seconds, just consider that client and that change that they're seeking and what complexities might be at play for them and how that might feel. Letter number 2, dear coach, my authority is not unlimited. So especially in the CEO role, coaches, employees, stakeholders all seem to think that I could just do whatever I want, that my authority was unlimited and I could, just do it, so to speak. But the fact is, in that role, I actually felt more constrained than almost any other role I'd ever been in. And it was because of those complexities that I just told you about. It was because no matter what I did, I was not going to make everyone happy. And so my authority was limited sometimes by governance. There were some things that I, even as the CEO, could not make the decision on, that the board of directors needed to make the decision. But even if my explicit authority was a certain level, my implicit authority might have actually been more limited than that. Because again, there's this complexity and I can't just, do whatever I want. Particularly in my case, one of the things about our organization that we were trying to transform to was a lot more self-organization. So if I just continually handed down edicts about things, then my teams in my organization were not going to have the ability to self-organize. And so my authority was even more limited by the culture that I wanted to create. So I intentionally limited my own authority. But it depends on, the organization, how those leaders interact with the leaders above them, so to speak, the type of organization you're trying to build. But there is no leader that has unlimited authority. And even if it seems like they do, they probably don't. So when you look at that note about the change and you are thinking about your current client, consider the limits of their authority, whether implicit or explicit. And for a moment, think about what limits might they have that I hadn't considered yet. And lastly, dear coach, there's a fear factor and an immense responsibility to get things right. When you are in a senior leadership position, especially, the expectations are incredibly high. And the funny thing is, this is another thing we don't like to talk about, like the image of a leader, at least in sort of the corporate traditional world, is someone who doesn't have any fear, which is a lie. One of the things I learned in my role as I got to know other CEOs was everyone's scared. Every single one of those people are scared. I guarantee you that, the CEO that you look up to that works at some famous company, they have had a moment where they had to step out and say or do something where they, thought they were going to vomit or couldn't breathe right before they walked out there. Now, they may have taken a deep breath and stepped out and didn't let you know that in the moment, but leaders are scared, whether they want you to believe that or not. So there is this responsibility to get things right because you are responsible for the careers and livelihoods of the people in your organization. And that is fear. Now, fear can absolutely be harnessed, and turned into energy, but we have to recognize how difficult it would be. Looking back to letter 1 with the amount of complexity, letter 2, the limits to authority, and now you add number 3, this fear factor. And so when you're looking at your note about the change and you're considering your current client, think about competing values, competing priorities, and the loneliness of bearing that alone. Now, I'm not going to lie, before I was in this job, I would hear people talk about like, the loneliness of leadership and, oh, and I would think, oh, poor them, like you're extremely successful, you're at the top of your game, and I should feel sorry for you. But I will tell you, there is an intense loneliness in that role, and one that you can help with, right? Because of the confidentiality that exists between coach and client, you can actually be that person for them when they may not feel able to really share that burden with anyone else. You have to consider, like, first of all, are people going to think poorly of me because I'm afraid? But also just, I don't want to put this on anyone else. Like, it's my job to carry this. And this is where your empathy can actually, create some space and some sharing of that burden. But when you combine the three things that I shared with you, it can be pretty heavy. And that's where I think we have an opportunity to really have a lot more empathy. That being said, what would your client say that they wish you knew? Considering that everything we just talked about in the last three letters, I want you to take a little bit longer of a pause here. And I want you to write down 3 emotions that your current client might be experiencing in their current situation. What is it that they wish you knew? Because I'm just sharing my own experience that I know is shared by some others, but I imagine that your specific situation, your client has some stuff going on. So I'm going to take a full minute. I'm going to give you a full minute to really think about, write the 3 emotions, but that might take you into a little bit of journaling. And I think that's a really good thing. What would your client say that they wish you knew? We'll be back in a minute. Okay, we're going to keep going, but feel free to keep writing if you need to. Don't want you to lose any of those thoughts. So there's 2 sides of this relationship, and I don't want you to think I've forgotten you. So for the next 3 slides, we're going to walk through the 3 things that we wish leaders knew as coaches. But there may be a little bit of learning for us in that too. So dearest leader, as a coach, here are the 3 things I wish you knew. Sincerely, your coach. Dear leader, doing things because the coach said so will never lead to meaningful change. So in my experience, especially, there are times when if a coach hires me in to either work with them directly or actually to work with some of their employees, they are hiring you for your expertise. And especially Agile coaching, again, has a little bit of a different nuance here. They want you to come in and give them some answers. And what I have learned is that you can do that. And then as soon as you leave, they're going to go back to doing whatever it is they were doing before. And so one of the things that I've always wanted leaders to understand is part of the reason that we coach, and I mean actually coach, help people find the solutions themselves, is because then they have ownership and they have an ability to carry something forward because they believe in it themselves. And that applies to the leader too. You know, it's not just their employees. It's, you know, you may think that you're doing something, you want me to tell you what to do, but again, as soon as I leave, you know, you're probably not going to continue doing that. However, powerful questions are not always the answer either. And that might be a little controversial to say. I do believe in powerful questions, but there are times when you have had experiences that, along with those powerful questions, you can share to your clients. One, to help them see that they're not alone. Two, to maybe get them going down the path, because sometimes they have no experience to draw from. They have not been in this situation before. And yes, you can powerful question your way into something, but sometimes it helps to give them a little bit to start with. But I do go back to, I'm not going to tell you directly how to do something. And frankly, that wouldn't have been helpful when I was a CEO either. You do need to balance the sharing of experience with questions that help the leader get to the solution themselves. Dear leader, I need your engagement to make meaningful change. And that could be in a one-on-one coach-client situation, or it could be an organizational change. And I sort of alluded to this earlier, but it's rare that you can get any sort of organizational change going without the leader's engagement. Sometimes they can accidentally be doing things that actually conflict with the change that is trying to happen in the organization. And it's not because they don't support the change, but sometimes they don't even recognize that what they're doing is in conflict with the change. And so they really need to be engaged with what we're trying to accomplish, you know, how we're going about it, and what their role is in it. And so as a leader, I need to be engaged in the change. And as a coach, we need to help them understand the value of that engagement. They have a lot of things on their plate. And if they don't understand the value of engaging and how their engagement helps, then why would I choose to spend time on that when I have 75 other things going on? But if I understand that my engagement is helpful and that it's going to create long-term change that will actually free me up, you know, if my organization is able to work more independently, they're all aligned to the vision, we're working together and rowing in the same direction, then I actually have more time as a leader to be strategic and think big, then wow, like I want to engage because it's better for me, it's better for the company. And of course, the same goes with, you know, if it's just a one-on-one coaching client relationship. If the only time that you as a leader are thinking about, you know, what we're working on is when we're together, then we're probably not going to get very far. And so I need your engagement on a day-to-day basis to help your growth as a leader. And dear leader, it's a little strange being on the outside. So one of the things about coaching is you're expected to keep this sort of objective and neutral stance. And what that might mean is that you're building relationships either with that client or with the organization in a different way, right? And so if every client that you have, you're expected to be sort of objectively on the outside, then you're always on the outside. Like it's kind of funny because when we talked about like being a CEO or being a senior leader can be very lonely, actually so can being a coach. When you're constantly expected to be neutral, then you're always sort of on this island. And I'll say something again, maybe a little controversial, but coaching without an agenda is not the same thing as coaching without emotional investment. It doesn't mean you're not allowed to have relationships. It just means you have to balance those relationships with objectivity. But it might be useful for the leader to know that you also have this like layer of loneliness that comes in your role. And you can have really good conversations with the leader about, about objectivity and about how you can emotionally invest while still being able to remain neutral. I think it would just surprise leaders to know, honestly, that the coach role can be a lonely role as well. So a little bit of self-reflection here too. Could you share any of these things within your current coaching relationship? Or are there other things that you wish you could share with your clients that you haven't? And maybe think for a minute too about why. Why haven't you? Could you? And you just have chosen to keep those things to yourself. Could having a conversation with them actually open them up to sharing your vulnerability actually encourages them to share their own so that you get to a richer place in your coaching and client relationship. So I'm going to give you another minute, and I want you to write down 3 things that you could share with your clients that you haven't. 1 minute on the clock. So going back to my experience being on both sides of this coin, it was difficult at first to hold all of these things in my head and my heart, like how I considered myself a coach first. And yet here I was, both a coach and a CEO. And it was difficult to stand in the shoes of the CEO while having the brain and the experience of the coach. And I'll give you a couple examples. When we talk about the complexity, here's all of this complexity already. And yet the coach side of me wants to think outside the box. And that sounds simple, but actually thinking outside the box at first felt like creating more complexity. And so that was really intimidating. It was like, God, how can I think outside the box and then just make this even harder to make a decision? As a leader, you're expected to have answers or give answers. But as a coach, you're all about exploration. And so I had this battle in my head, like, how can I explore and let people know I'm exploring when they're expecting me to have all the answers? And then, as the leader in the situation, you're on the inside. You are more inside than almost anyone else. Yet as a coach, my coach brain was like, you need to stay objective and you need to stay on the outside. And there's only so much of that you can do. So I had this battle. Like, it was difficult to hold both of these things at the same time. Now, I had some great coaches. I had some great coaches who helped me walk through some of that and reconcile it. And so when I learned to blend and balance the internal perspectives of leader and coach, I actually became better at both. I learned that when I have complexity, I need to think outside the box. And I can create some constraints to make that less complex. I have to get really clear about the outcome that I'm trying to achieve. And that's how I think my way out of the box and out of the complexity. I don't have all the answers. regardless of whether people expect me to or not, I just don't. And so in order to get to those answers, I need to seek exploration. And I need to seek it not just within myself, but with the very smart people around me who can help me get to those answers. And while I am deeply inside as the leader, I do have the ability to turn on my coach brain and step outside and to think objectively. And I became really powerful, frankly, when I was able to switch back and forth between the two. Because now, like when I stepped outside, I still had inside knowledge. I still knew what it was like to be in those leaders' shoes. But when I could step into the coach role and think objectively with that information, I was even better. And so that is how I journeyed from coach to CEO and back. I am open to your questions. Oh, sorry, I'm wrong. I have one more. Sorry. I thought I wasn't done yet. Sorry, one last note from the coach and the leader. So, dear coach, and I'm speaking directly to those of you on the call right now. You may not hear this enough, but what you do is so essential to the success of me and my business. And I appreciate your perspective and your heart. You may not hear that enough, so I wanted to make sure you heard that today. What's going on? There we go. Dear leader, one last note. I see you. I see the endless meetings, the task list, the impossible decisions, and the sleepless nights. Together, we can navigate this. So, takeaways. Don't play the blame game, even in your own head. Catch yourself and stop the blame game. Continuously and intentionally invite empathy with the client or coach that you're partnered with. Holding both perspectives in your head and heart can make you better equipped to coach. So your call to action is have a conversation with your client. What do they wish you knew? What can you share with them? Deepen your coaching relationship through actively inviting empathy. Especially if you've been with a client for a long time, you may think that you have this, but taking the pause to really have the conversation may take you to an entirely different level. And now I invite your questions. That is really the last slide.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I took so many notes. This was really, really so informative, and I really thank you for the information that you shared. So we're going to open up. We have a few minutes. So are there any questions? You can either type them in the chat or just speak up.
Yeah, hi, Pranda. This is Ajit here. I have one question with Melissa. Melissa, this is very powerful presentation and really eye-opening, as in how the leaders think about the coaches, and the coaches need to know about the leader's perspective, right? The kind of empathy both have to make it work. And you answered a lot of questions there, and it perfectly makes sense. But then I have been with some leaderships who would rather be happy to share their perspectives, but then they really don't want to change and take back from the coaches to give it back, and come to that space where they can negotiate, talk, because they're very rigid. They boast up on their experiences, command and control styles, and they think that can only work in why they really how the I mean the coach's stand is someone who in doubt, who could and could not do. How do we deal with this kind of situations?
So just let me reflect back what I heard you say. So how do we interact with leaders who are unwilling to, they're willing to share their own perspective, but they're really sort of unwilling to hear yours? Is that what you're
Exactly
saying?
Yes.
That's a tough one because we can't control other people. And as much as we would like to kind of, grab them by the shoulders and shake, I I would sit in a very curious position with that. So for instance, why might they be feeling that way? Why might they have these walls? Which is sort of what I hear you describing. It's like they're happy to let down the wall in order to share their position, but they're kind of not letting anything in. One perspective that I might take is that they're getting a lot of input from a lot of people. And every piece of input comes with an expectation. So one of the things I was not prepared for stepping into that role is that people always wanted things from me constantly. And so it was hard to let my walls down at times because I was afraid of what's coming behind it. It was like, okay, I'm open to hearing your perspective, but right behind your perspective is something additional that I'm going to have to do or feel or say or whatnot. And so maybe one way to approach that situation, and again, like every person's different, every situation is different, is sort of to recognize and say to them, like, I understand that people want a lot of things from you. And I understand there's a lot of pressure and burden on you. I want to share where I'm coming from, not because I need anything from you in this moment, but because I want us to understand each other better so that I can help you more. Like helping them to understand, like, there's no reason for you to share your perspective with them except to better your relationship and help them better, because that's what you're there for. That's the only thing I can, like, right off the top of my head really think is that it may just be that they have so much coming at them at any given time that it feels overwhelming to take in anything else. So if you can help them see that, I'm still here to help you. I'm not putting something on you. I just want to make this better so I can help. Maybe that will help.
And you have another question here. Ajit, did that answer your question? Did you have any more?
Yes, very much. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you.
Great, thank you. You have another question here in the chat. What is
Yes.
Okay, just 1 second. So what is a good guideline or approach for a leader who is at risk of losing his job?
Ooh, that is a tough one. Wow, that is tough because there is a lot of nuance there. Like, what are you there to help with in the first place? Is what you're doing actually like making their situation better or worse? But mostly I would just say, again, stepping into their shoes, like imagine what it must be like to have to continue to lead when at risk of losing your job, and so, meeting them where they are and talking to them about, like, so why is there that risk? That would be my first question. Like, is it real risk or is it just perceived risk? And just helping them step into their personal values. So I think you can't go wrong as a leader, no matter what happens to your situation, if you have stood firm in your values the entire time. So if I do get fired, but I can walk out knowing that I was true to myself and true to my values the entire time, then not only do I feel better, but maybe I'm set up for a different job that is better for me, right? So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of complexity to that situation. But sorry, let me look here. I'm seeing your comments. So you were the coach trying to help him save his job. I think everything I said still stands, because if you can't save your job by staying in your values, then it may not be the right job in the first place. But helping them to investigate, like, is it real risk or is it perceived risk? And really actually sort of decentralizing the leader themselves and saying, how am I leading and how am I serving my company? If I do that to the best of my ability and stand in my values and I still get fired, then that company probably doesn't deserve you anyway. You know, but that is a tough one. You have my empathy in that situation.
And next we have Michelangelo, who has a question for you.
Hi, Melissa.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I really enjoyed the presentations and the way how you played with the postcards, and very nice, really very good. I know very well Scrum Alliance, Scrum Alliance member from years now, and I experienced Agile for, well, I would say quite a while. Then I decided to become a professional coach, and when I say professional coach, join ICF and then become PCC certified, and then now I'm into mastery program. But don't you think that because the majority of problems that you explain are problems at the CEO level or an important leaders level, and usually at that level should be only professional coaches or really with a great experience that have to deal with those senior leaders. Don't you think that especially in Agile, and I think that because I know that there is a sort of inexperience in terms of bringing, you know, the principles, the values, that revolutions into play, and which is probably still a little bit far from real coaching or the way how professional coaches should help. I'm saying this because professional coaches, on the other hand, they don't know Agile, they don't know the challenge, and then sometimes focusing on people only, it's not enough. So I'm just wondering if the kind of things that, well, the Scrum Master has the name master, but it can be a junior person. And then, which is different than in other disciplines, like a master is a real master, right? So what do you think about that kind of distance between professional coaching and Agile now at the moment?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, I mean, I do want to clarify that I and the coaches that were working with me, we are professional coaches who have an understanding of agility. So most coaches at the CEC level with like the Scrum Alliance certifications are ORS coaches or coactive coaches. So they are professional coaches who just have an understanding of Agile values and principles. And that's actually why I actually am no longer an employee of Scrum Alliance, but I am still a CEC. But that's why they created that certification, to sort of distinguish the professional coaches who have an understanding of Agile as the ones that could work with executive level leaders. So I agree with you, but those people do exist, if I'm understanding your question correctly. I wouldn't see, like, I didn't have, and no disrespect whatsoever, there's some incredibly knowledgeable and talented Scrum Masters who are very senior. They have just chosen to stay at the team level, but those were not the people that were coaching me when I was a CEO.
Thank you.
You have one question here in the chat. My experience as an Agile coach is that most of the time leaders want solutions and are not used to invest the time needed for reflection, even though they engage in a coaching process. How can, Melissa, how can we help here, practically speaking?
It's hard. It's really hard. I mean, the only thing that you can do is show them the value of their engagement and talk to them about, like, they're paying you as a coach, as an Agile coach, but I'm only going to be so successful without your engagement, you know, and try to understand how you might engage them in a way that has, I don't want to say the minimal impact to them, but like, how can you condense that need for engagement? Like, can you find different mediums for them to communicate their engagement to the organization? It doesn't always have to be a 3-day workshop. You know, I mean, they can be very impactful by recording a session or by, just doing little pop-ins with teams. It's harder remotely, but possible. So be respectful of their time and make sure they understand that you're respectful of their time, and talk with them about like, how can we get the most impact from the limited time that you have? Because I can say, not just from my own experience, but from working, and becoming friends with other CEOs, the number one resource that they are protecting is their time. And so how can you get the most out of what time they can offer? And when you show that you respect that you recognize it, that you're not just like, oh, a 3-day workshop's no big deal, then you're more likely to get some engagement. Frankly, there are some that are just not going to. Like, they're just not going to engage. And so, if you've had that conversation with them, and if you've said like, without your engagement, I'm only going to be so successful, and they're willing to accept that, for the moment, you may have to accept that too. And you may have to say, awesome, who's your right-hand person, who knows your vision, and I can work with them, but I would keep trying. So it's like, maybe you work with the COO, but you still continue kind of at intervals to remind the CEO how impactful they could be if they found the time. Not in an annoying way, but just, when you have the opportunity to continue to try to engage them.
Wonderful. So you have some comments here, which are really great. Coaches are great leaders.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello, Ms. Brenda. Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
I guess I would like to ask one question.
Sure.
That as a coach or leader, as a performing as CEO, I have read yesterday that he will care his subordinates and ordinates his care to him. So I don't understand what is the hidden theme of the sentences, or what is the interlink of this? Please explain this.
I'm sorry, I don't think I quite got your question. Can you rephrase your question?
Okay, I have read yesterday that coaches or leader will care his subordinates or people. People will care leader. So I don't understand what is the interlink between them. How people can care the leaders. So please explain this sentence.
Okay, I think I understood your question as you read that leaders that care about their people, in turn, then their people care about the leader. Is that right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
So, I mean, the link between that is everyone wants to know that they matter. Everyone wants to know that they're not just a number in an organization. And when the leader can demonstrate that, basically, if I honor your humanity, then you will honor mine in return. Like, for the most part, it's fairly simple. Like, if I believe that my leader cares about me, then I am loyal to that leader, because they don't just see me as, a chess piece or disposable. It's just another number. They see me as a human being. So I'm going to return that care to them. I think that might answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Brenda, you're muted.
There you go. Thank you, Kasim, for your question. And so, Melissa, you have a couple of wonderful thank yous in the chat. One says, coaches are great leaders because they know how to unlock potential and motivate people to maximize their performance. And coaches play a great role to understand the psychology of people and motivate them accordingly. And then you just have quite a few thank yous there saying great presentation. So we too want to tell you from Coach Transformation Academy that we really do appreciate. This was an awesome presentation. And I think Soham has already put in the chat, and he can post that again for you very quickly, where you can see these recordings again, and also tell other people about them too. So we look forward to seeing you next week. And thank you so much, all of you, for joining us for this Transformational Tuesday. Thank you again. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.